Hello again, honeys, and welcome to the first episode of July 2024, The Mysteries of the Last Supper. Today we will be exclusively focusing on one of the most famous works in the world, second maybe only to Da Vinci's other one. You know, the lady who may or may not be smiling. We'll be getting into the famous artwork itself, the hype surrounding Leo and the rest of his works, and why this particular painting is still studied today. So here we go, honeys, the story of Da Vinci and the story of The Last Supper. First, a summary of Da Vinci's life, because it actually has a lot to do with how The Last Supper came to be. If he wasn't in certain places at certain times, he would not have gotten that commission. Born April 15th in 1452, small town Tuscany, Da Vinci began his 9-year apprenticeship at the age of 14 to Andrea del Verrocchio. Because his mentor was a popular sculptor, painter, and goldsmith, very important in the art world of the day, at least in local Italy, Da Vinci more than likely had rare opportunities to meet masters and even work alongside future big names such as Botticelli or Perugino or even Donatello, Verrocchio's master. Da Vinci was able to pick up a wide range of skills, not only in studio, but in general work through that apprenticeship. He learned everything from drawing to metallurgy, chemistry, painting, carpentry, color mixing, and even more. He officially became a member of the Florence Painters Guild as of 1472, but decided to continue his studies until 76. The clearest evidence of Verrocchio's influence on Da Vinci is in the vitality, the anatomical correctness of the latter's works. Da Vinci moved to Milan in 1506 to accept an official commission for an equestrian statue. He stayed there for 7 years after, producing a body of drawings ranging everything from anatomy to botany, and this is where he started making sketches of weaponry, inventions, as well as studies of birds in flight. The artist decided to leave the city of Milan in 1513 and spend some time in Rome, but the October of 1515 brought the recapturing of Milan by King Francis I of France. One of our sources for today, a Business Insider article, puts forth that the commission was possibly given to him for Last Supper because this equestrian statue he just finished and was hoping to make his name out of, to get more fame from, was melted down during the invasion. So King Francis I was kind of like, here's an I'm sorry replacement opportunity. The ruler of France also conferred upon Da Vinci the title of premier architect, artist, and mechanic to the king. So he was made to enter Francis's service in 1516 and thus was made also to move one last time to his final place of residence near the Fontainebleau court of French King Francis I. It's very popularly believed that this rural home in Clos, France, is the place where Leonardo completed his final painting, St. John the Baptist. That particular work is important to Da Vinci's legacy because it demonstrates his perfection of the sfumato, which is a shading technique that produces soft, nearly imperceptible transitions between various colors and tones. Da Vinci eventually died at Clos Luz on May 2nd, 1519, at the age of 67. The cause is generally believed to be recurrent stroke, and he was buried at the chapel of Saint Hubert en Bois, France, as a close friend of the king. Taking a look at his legacy, his career, and impact on art history, it's clear to see that he was the Renaissance man as a painter, architect, sculptor, engineer, inventor, mathematician, anatomist, writer, so much more. It's a pretty well-known fact that he was a quote-unquote genius from the High Renaissance period and is considered one of, if not the best of all time. There's lots of evidence to his impact within his circles, on his peers of the day. For example, LeonardoDaVinci.net points out that Raphael, as well as occasionally rival Michelangelo, would adopt some of Da Vinci's techniques to try and replicate the active realistic look of Da Vinci's figures. They state, quote, "His innovative breaks from artistic standards of the day would guide generations of artists that followed," end quote. We see lots of evidence that this is true, especially in Da Vinci's unique takes on figure placement and emotions in customary and popular religious scenes, as well as his signature perspectives. These all inspired a lot of future experimentation by other artists. As a result of his fame, scholars have also spent a lot of time trying to figure out exactly which pieces Da Vinci contributed to in Verrocchio's studio productions and what parts of those pieces. As art and context contributor Alicia Duplessis points out, despite having initially been known just for his paintings, Da Vinci became an icon because of the discovery and sharing of his notebooks, which depicted tons of subjects, everything from astronomy to anatomy, paleontology, and botany. Da Vinci's first known artwork is the 1473 landscape drawing for Santa Maria della Neve. It is a small pen and ink depiction of the Arno River Valley. For most of his career, like many of his colleagues, he took portrait commissions as they came, but focused primarily on religious subjects, the most renowned and popular of which include Madonna of the Carnation, Ginevra de' Benci, Benoit Madonna, Adoration of the Magi, and St. Jerome in the Wilderness. The last two of those list members are unfinished works of his. And I mentioned his biography was important, and here's where that comes in. Upon his return to Milan and his residency there in the early 1500s, he began those exploratory drawings of a human flight machine. All of his drawings, in fact, during this time, reflect Da Vinci's interest in engineering, how things come together and how they work. All right, fairly certain we have covered Da Vinci well enough, so let's move on to the work of the day, The Last Supper and all of its hidden treasures. Let's start big picture before we get into the details of the work as well as the nitty-gritty of its history. First of all, it low-key has another name, Il Cenacolo, but whatever you decide to call it, it's easily one of the most recognizable artworks in history, admired as much by just casual fans as it is critics. The piece has been studied at length by many art scholars and historians since its creation. And it's actually much bigger than you would think. It's 15 by 29 feet, or 4.6 meters high and 8.8 wide. And it's actually been a UNESCO World Heritage Site, both the church that the painting is located in as well as the monastery attached to it, since 1990. It met various criteria regarding unique artistic achievement of exceptional universal value. They go on to note that The Last Supper has had a considerable influence not only on how exactly the Last Supper scene has been interpreted and depicted ever since, but just on art history at large. Starting to look at the history of the painting, it was completed between 1495 and 1498 as part of a commission to renovate the Convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie, a church that's situated in Milan, Italy, as well as some of its other buildings. The work and renovations were commissioned by Ludovico Sforza, Duke of the city. The work was an immediate success across Europe, Da Vinci's first, and really what cemented his legacy before the Mona Lisa. In the process of making the work, Da Vinci employed lots of tools and techniques that are unusual, if not brand new, and worth a look at. This is especially true because it's one of the first paintings of this scale that Da Vinci ever made. He had lots to figure out as he went. As the result of one of Da Vinci's innovations used here, the painting cannot be moved. It's painted directly into and onto the walls, but it's not technically a fresco either because it's not painted into wet plaster. So how did Da Vinci do it? He went against traditional formats in order to avoid the dullness of frescoes. He didn't want the time constraints that come with trying to beat the drying of a fresco. Instead, Da Vinci worked out a system using stone and tempera paints, as well as a specific priming method to ensure the paints bound to the wall and were protected from moisture damage. That process involved covering the wall with a double layer of dried plaster, and then actually used an idea common to panel painting. He added an undercoat of lead white to enhance the brightness of the color applied on top. The materials ended up as a combination of tempera and oil onto gypsum. Unfortunately, this innovation would turn out to be more problematic than expected. As the Khan Academy explains, quote, because the painting is on a thin exterior wall, it amplified the effects of humidity, and the paint failed to properly adhere to the wall. Mold grew between the paint and the surface, and the presence of moisture caused constant peeling, end quote. We'll circle back to how that problem was dealt with in a minute, but let's stay in the present, so to speak, for now. The work gets a lot of praise for the unique combination of perspectives that it uses. Some are linear, meaning that they disappear to a single point as the eye would see in real life, but there are other sight lines as well. And the perfection of these lines has to do with the fact that Da Vinci would actually hammer nails into the wall and use pieces of string tied between them as guides for these perspective lines to make sure they were correct. We can also use this work to just appreciate Da Vinci's technical skill. He is able to represent the tiniest joints of the fingers in Christ's hand, distinguishable through the wine glass in front of them. That's incredibly detailed work. So we know how it was made. Let's take a look at what exactly it's showing us. It's the scene of the supper at which Jesus Christ supposedly reveals to his disciples that one of them is going to betray him very soon. Da Vinci's version of this moment is famous because of how well it conveys timing. There's a transition encapsulated in the narrative drama seen here. Da Vinci manages to squash together the last time that JC would eat with his disciples before being captured and sentenced to death, basically, as well as the moment he reveals to them that he knows about this inevitable betrayal. Da Vinci's able to, by combining these, capture and emphasize, really crank up the shock and the rage experienced by the friend group at the very end of Christ's life. This part of Christ's story is a super important one. It explains lots of Catholic and Christian rituals that are even done today. For example, it's the origin of the whole foot thing. At this scene, Jesus washes all of his friends' feet, really, as a gesture symbolizing that all are equal under God, even him to them. It's also the origin of the Eucharist, the body and blood thing. During this meal, JC gives the disciples explicit instructions on how to eat and drink in the future in remembrance of him, and that is still the same thing that's done in every Mass today. To include this specific scene in a church, a monastery, makes a lot of sense because it will remind the occupants daily to, follow procedure, to be loyal, to remember the love of God, all of those things that they would be expected to believe in. Another unfortunate reality, though, is that the work has gone through it, and despite Da Vinci's brand new and thoughtful method, that paint began peeling and showing damage as early as the 1500s. So a brief rundown of all the times the painting was either in or suffered imminent danger. First, King Louis invaded Milan in 1499 and nearly just straight cut it out of the wall to take it home. He liked it so much. In 1652, renovations led to a section of it being destroyed for the addition of a door. A couple of centuries later, Napoleon's invading troops used the refectory as a stable when passing through. They used the painting itself for target practice. And then a flood in the beginning of the 19th century sped up mold growth damage And finally, World War II came along. Some sources I found put it very nicely, said strong vibrations from Allied bombing further damaged the work. For example, LaSalle University, who noted that the iron framework of this specific part of the church protected that wall from complete destruction. But further digging revealed that the wall the Last Supper is painted on had been given extra support with sandbags and mattresses. But once the roof and the other walls were blown off of the space in August of 1943, the Last Supper remained exposed to the elements for several months, at times only covered by a tarp. Unfortunately, the masterwork stayed that way until after the war. Eventually, the refectory, or the room of the monastery where the Last Supper is located, ironically a dining room, was rebuilt, and a team of restorers began working to not only preserve but to restore that painting. Now, despite all it suffered, there have been efforts to preserve or conserve or even restore the painting across the centuries, but much of the original has been destroyed due to environmental factors. Various records exist, actually, of restoration projects from the 18th century up to the present day, which show exactly how much concern there is regarding this piece of artistic heritage, how much people love it. What's fascinating is that the most recent of the restorations, done in 1980, a 19-year process, in fact, was extremely controversial. Duplessis writes, quote, "Much of the work done either damaged the art even further or covered the original brushstrokes of the artist," end quote. The project sparked then, and still gets caught up in debates about today, restoration, conservation, as well as public and professional attitudes towards both, and how they might change even over time. Khan Academy reports, quote, "In 1999, when the fully restored painting in its new climate-controlled environment was revealed, critics around the globe argued as to whether it is now true to the original or irrevocably deformed, as only about 42.5% of the present surface is Da Vinci's work, 17.5% is lost, and the remaining 40% was added by previous restorers. Most of this repainting can be found in the painting's wall hangings and ceiling," end quote. Although those figures seem shocking to us these days, 40 whole percent, and it is true that the practice now would be to leave these sections blank, throughout the better part of the 20th century, good practice was actually considered to be filling in what's missing as best as possible based on available knowledge. This is very much the Theseus ship argument, but it also tells us about how people see restoration and what they think is appropriate restoration, both in the field and outside it. And one final note in the general section of information on this painting, it's actually quite hard to see it in person because the room capacity is only 25 and you only get a viewing time of 15 minutes. There is a dress code and it's advised you buy your tickets 2 months in advance. The Last Supper is one of the most reproduced paintings in the world, so let's dedicate a small section to the noteworthy renditions. 3 of Da Vinci's students made copies of his paintings in the early 16th century. First, Giampietrino made a full-scale copy, now in London's Royal Academy of Arts, oil done on canvas, and this is the primary resource actually for the latest restorations of Da Vinci's original. There's additionally a copy by Andrea Solari, housed at the Leonardo da Vinci Museum in Belgium, and finally a copy located in the Church de Sant'Ambrogio in Switzerland by Cesare da Sesto. And moving towards the 21st century, a few more recent interpretations. First, Andy Warhol's 60 Last Suppers of 1986. Completed only 1 year before the artist's death and the first displayed in a gallery across the street from Da Vinci's original, it is, as Christie's auction house says, quote, "an exhaustive series of variations, some freehand, some showing outlines, some using a photostat of the oil painting as the source image for a silkscreen," end quote. The Gagosian Gallery puts forth the suggestion that Warhol chose this subject matter as well as related themes in the last decade of his career, in part because of the conflict between his Catholic faith and his homosexuality. They write, quote, "The image of Christ offering his flesh in the Eucharist was a symbol of salvation during a time of heightened suffering, an unusually personal and emotional image for Warhol," end quote. Christie's also suggests that this is an attempt for Warhol to seal his place within the art historical canon by incorporating masters into his iconic style. Next, we have Mary Beth Edelson's Some Living American Women Artists / Last Supper from 1972. Produced at the height of the second wave feminist movement with an all-female cast, the work is intended to draw artists and impactful women at large into the spotlight and celebrate them. The MoMA writes that she essentially used the familiar format of the Last Supper to spoof the male exclusivity of the patriarchy, saying that, quote, "Aside from Georgia O'Keeffe in the role of Jesus, all the other women are randomly placed, and in a gesture of solidarity, Edelson opted not to have any of her peers in the traitorous role of Judas," end quote. Edelson literally replaces the men familiar in the image with these women to literally put them into the art historical canon, to give them a sort of legitimacy and holiness that she feels they're lacking otherwise. And the final version we'll talk about at length today is David LaChapelle's Last Supper from the series Jesus is My Homeboy from 2003. Honeys, I saw this one in person in Barcelona and I just loved it. The image manages to bring together the lowbrow with the spiritual, the epoch of holiness. The apostles of today are firmly sat in the picture, celebrated as the same sort of outsiders that Jesus and his crew would have been in actual biblical text. Though the figure representing Jesus in this picture is white and dresses somewhat traditionally, the others are of various races who are often stereotyped and stigmatized. All of them come together in a contemporary representation of common beliefs as well as community. The image embraces pop culture, the small apartment lifestyle and setting as its own special sort of stage. LaChapelle's version is intended to demonstrate contemporary spirituality by showing what brotherhood looks like today, various forms of love based on shared experience, as well as contemporary discussion. Writes the Moco Museum of Barcelona, where I saw it, quote, "LaChapelle wanted to rescue the teachings of Christ from the fundamentalists who tend to use his words to persecute and judge others rather than just show love," end quote. Honeys, those are not my words, those are theirs. I don't disagree with them, but they're not my words, so don't shoot the messenger. All right, we have made our way through famous and impactful renditions, the history of the work, Leonardo's life itself, the importance of this scene to biblical text. Let's get to the secrets and hidden messages, the little-known facts of the Last Supper. It's very fair to say that there are lots of theories and conspiracies that all is not as it seems in this image. Duplessis, for one, points out, quote, "Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince wrote a conspiratorial book called The Templar Revelation, in which they have put forth the theory that the person standing to the left of Jesus is Mary Magdalene and not John. They have suggested that the painting contains evidence of a cover-up by the Catholic Church around the true identity of Jesus," end quote. Pop culture, of course, loves these theories, so much so they made a series of books and movies about it. Cough, cough, Da Vinci Code. The work does show up in other places across pop culture, however. It's been referenced in Futurama, History of the World Part 1, Inherent Vice, and Viridiana. An artist named Vic Muniz apparently also once made a version out of chocolate syrup. Moving on to more general mythology, general weird points of the work. First, for a long time, it was believed that the model that Da Vinci found in jail, the quote-unquote perfect Judas, was in fact the same one that he had used for painting the Jesus Christ figure only 3 years earlier, but who had become a criminal and hardened and beat down by life. This myth is debunked by the fact that that's just too short of a timeline, as well as the very high likelihood that the story about the model was made up later to hammer home, really, the ideas behind the Last Supper. Many also believe that the painting could hint at Da Vinci's beliefs in nature, not religion. Some argue that he chose not to put a halo on Christ even though it was the norm of the day and others did before and after him, because he believed that nature was superior to every person in the painting. That's why everyone's depicted as a commoner. Other academics, however, think that he's missing the halo explicitly because he's still a human being in this scene. He has yet to endure the passion suffering that makes him into a holy, reincarnated figure. And finally, for general terms, the linear perspective as well as the scale of the table are way off. Linear perspective relies on a specific viewing location. It's a specific vantage point to look at the painting from in order for it to seem natural. But the viewing location or vantage point here is 15 feet or 4.5 meters off the ground, with the bottom edge of the work 8 feet. So there's nobody really tall enough or able to get a correct viewing spot based on the architecture of the space. So the question remains, why did Da Vinci make the vantage point so high? Why would he have chosen this perspective? And of course, though it was probably scaled to fit 13 on one side, that table just does not make sense for the space. It's way too big. Getting into some of the details a little further, let's look at the meanings and the mysteries behind the characters and their placements, the bodily arrangements in the Last Supper, as well as their interactions with the architecture of the room. LaSalle University articles note that while predecessors had identified everyone at the table with gestures only and shown all the characters literally around the table, thus making some backs turn to the viewer, Da Vinci was the first to break with these norms. And what's more, research done by some of their own professors shows that Leonardo's preliminary drawings showed this more quote-unquote traditional composition with backs turned, but that later Da Vinci instead decided to change the moment to that before Christ identified Judas. He shifts his aim from having the most natural depiction possible to having the most emotionally dramatic moment possible. That is why he instead groups the apostles in threes with Jesus at the center, thus creating this slight outline of a triangle, adding those 3 windows behind the Christ figure to balance this triangle. So lots of sources are quick to point out, and it's fairly obvious to see that there's lots of geometric forms and balance in this composition. Certain so-called ideal geometric forms, such as pediments and circles hidden within the outlines of the groups in this painting, refer to Renaissance interests in Neoplatonism, Khan Academy writes. Neoplatonism was an element of humanism that tried to basically combine parts of Greek philosophy with parts of Christian theology. Leonardo does the same thing here. This geometry, once used by the Greeks to express heavenly perfection, is used by Da Vinci to celebrate Christ as the embodiment of heaven on earth, which is why the arches of those windows and the way the light shines through them makes something of a halo substitution. It also explains Da Vinci's use of 3 windows. It's a reference to the Holy Trinity, and the groups of 4 are an important reference to classical traditions such as Plato's 4 virtues. The fact that the landscape is visible beyond the windows is often interpreted as a way of communicating Da Vinci's belief in a paradise that one can only reach through Christ, who, as we keep saying, right in front of those windows. The interior is so simple because it's designed not to distract from the people-centered events, but rather amplify the inherent spirituality. The table itself is used to separate our earthly beings from their holy worlds, and the tapestries along the left wall actually make a real-life reference. They were more than likely inspired by those hanging on the walls in the Milanese castles, especially those of the Duke who commissioned the Last Supper. Though it may be simple, It's very possible that this interior is modeled after the patron's court, Ludovico Sforza. One fascinating detail of this artwork is that every character reacts uniquely because Da Vinci hand-tailored their reactions based on every apostle's storylines, descriptions, etc. It's a little-known fact that Da Vinci was very picky about his models and about how the characters showed up in his work. Medium magazine writer Jesus Salazar claims that Da Vinci broke with regular partner relationship norms of the day between artists and models. Da Vinci would supposedly determine ahead of his search exactly what faces or qualities he wanted in a model, then go look for specifically that. He did reuse models, or at least figures from previous artworks though, for Last Supper. Business Insider quotes historian and author Ross King, who points to earlier sketches of musicians as a basis for James the Greater in this work. One way in which Da Vinci kind of aligned with norms of the day is that he did use some specific identifying attributes. Quick side note, it was the norm of the day to do that in order to explain or signal to the largely illiterate church audiences who was who in these paintings. Khan Academy notes the example of Peter in the Last Supper next to Judas, who holds a knife in his right hand, foreshadowing the fact that Peter is gonna cut off the ear of a soldier as he tries to protect JC from getting arrested. As we kind of covered but didn't actually answer, I'm realizing, earlier in the episode, the question has been raised, is it really Mary Magdalene next to JC and not St. John? The answer is a firm, resounding no. The rumors began over the years because the St. John figure is placed so close to Christ's side. He is very androgynous and youthful looking. King, however, notes that this beardless and loyal depiction aligns with compositional norms for this scene, as well as Da Vinci's own personal ideals of beauty. Though he goes on to say she shows up in other Last Supper versions and it wouldn't be completely abnormal, that's just not the case here. It is definitely St. John. Next, we have a subtle reference by Thomas that a lot of art historians have been made aware of, but I'd be not surprised if it didn't make it outside the art historical echo chamber. He stands in profile with a single finger raised to the right of JC. Scholars believe that that prominent single-pointed finger is also foreshadowing. It is a symbol of the resurrection because it's the same one that Thomas uses later in the story to check the wounds and see if Christ is really there. And this wouldn't be the Last Supper if we didn't talk about Judas, our good old backstabbing, betraying bitch. He's actually a whole lot more complex than he looks here though, so let's dive in. Now we know from earlier in the episode that it's pretty common art historical fact that Da Vinci wanted Judas to look like a criminal, and so he used a model from the jails of Milan to base this depiction on. But the story goes a little deeper than that. To prove Da Vinci's pickiness, he wanted this model and none other, so he got the Duke to delay this guy's execution in order to sit for the painting. Also with Judas, there are some symbols, some clues surrounding him that are more clear than others. For example, as LaSalle University points out, he's at the front of the group towards Christ's left, which is very biblically accurate, and holds a small purse of money, the reward for his betrayal. Now, according to Khan Academy, when Leonardo shows Philip asking here, is it me, the one who's going to betray you? Christ says instead, the one who reaches for the same plate as me is the one who's going to betray me. Well, sure enough, here we see Christ and Judas both reaching towards the plate that sits between them, even as Judas starts to lean his body away, knowing that he is that betrayer. Even the meaning of the spilled salt in front of Judas is still up for debate, with some scholars saying it symbolizes betrayal and others saying it's a sign of his bad luck, that he has to be the one to betray Christ according to destiny. Similar debates surround the fish nearby on the table, and note that this is fish because of Da Vinci's pescatarianism, not necessarily biblical accuracy. The debates about the type of fish are fairly serious because they might change the meaning of the actual object, the symbology. If it's an eel, scholars think that the symbology is in the Italian connections between the words aringa and arenga, the latter of which means to indoctrinate. If it's herring, however, scholars think that the symbology is more in line with North Italian renga, which is a word also describing someone who denies religion. The herring does fit a little better, in my opinion, with the Jesus Christ prediction that the Apostle Peter will deny knowing him later on, but it's still open for discussion. But there are dozens of food conspiracies and potential messages hidden in the work. The one we're going to focus on is that the Last Supper may have a musical hymn coded into the bread. This is one of the more recent discoveries surrounding the painting, proposed in 2007 by Oxford doctoral candidate Giovanni Maria Palla. Palla discovered that when examining the work's straight rows of bread pieces in relation to hand placement of those 13 figures, this combination creates a tense 40-second melody when it's overlaid with a standard musical staff. This tune supposedly captures the mood of Jesus' anticipation of Judas's betrayal. As Da Vinci was left-handed and often wrote right to left or backward as a means of preserving secrecy even in his own workbooks, it's very possible that this hidden tune is an intentional inclusion. And in our last, although most out there, mystery of the day, there have been arguments made for hidden astrological or mathematical content in the work. Vatican researcher Sefrina Sforza Galizia stated she had deciphered an astrological and mathematical translation of the painting that represented apocalyptic symbols back in, I believe it was 2006. Her predictions included a downpour of Noah's Ark levels from March until November in the year 4006. Although the Last Supper has been studied for decades and continues to reveal new things about itself, there's a ton of history already confirmed and ready to unpack. So I'm grateful you took this trip with me on that unpacking. Hope you learned a few new things about the Last Supper, some exciting new mysteries to suss out yourself. We are going to leave it here for today and let you enjoy your nice long hot weekend. We will be back Tuesday with a brand new business, and I'll talk to you then, honeys. This podcast was created, produced, written, hosted, edited, and fact-checked by Master's graduate Celia Bugno. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on all of your favorite streaming platforms as well as your social medias.